After years as the Duke's final choice, she packed one bag. He found it and couldn't move. The message arrived at 8:14. Elena had been at the kitchen window for 22 minutes before it came. She had known, somewhere around the 8 o'clock mark, that something was wrong. Not from any dramatic sign, not because the phone had rung or the door had opened. She had known the way a person comes to know certain things after a long time, in a particular kind of relationship, through a quiet internal recognition that has learned to keep its voice low. The restaurant was 15 minutes away. Their reservation had been for 8. Dominic had made it himself, which she had noted as meaningful, because he did not usually make the arrangements himself. He had assistants for that, and habits for delegating, and a general preference for having things organized around him, rather than being the one to organize. The fact that he had called the restaurant directly, had given her the name of the place and the time a full week ahead, had made her believe, she could see now, clearly, that she had believed it, that tonight was going to be different. She had worn the burgundy dress for it. She had worn her grandmother's earrings. Her phone was face down on the counter. She had placed it there at 7:45 because she knew herself. She knew that watching a screen for a message that has not yet arrived is a specific and corrosive form of suffering, and she had already spent too many evenings suffering that way. When the screen lit up, she did not rush to it. She stood for one more slow breath. Then she crossed the kitchen and turned it over. "Really sorry. Arthur just pulled me into something I can't get out of. I'll explain tonight. Don't wait up." She read it once. She set the phone down. She was very still. This was their 7th anniversary. She had told herself she would not count, but the number came before the thought finished. 23. Approximately, she had stopped maintaining an exact record somewhere around the 3rd year, because recording things meant confronting them, and confronting them meant deciding what to do about what she had found. She had not been ready to decide, but the number lived in her somewhere, unwritten but exact. The accumulated weight of dinners, trips, occasions, evenings, she had dressed for and undressed from, with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a woman who had become very good at standing down. 23, and this one. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. She was careful about this. She smoothed the fabric, straightened the collar, made sure the loop caught cleanly on the hook. It is the kind of thing you do with small objects when something large is beyond your control. Then she went to the bedroom. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time, without changing expression. She was 38 years old. Dark hair, kept simple. Eyes that her mother had once described as eyes that see more than they let on. A still, dark brown that tended to observe rather than announce. The posture of a woman who had spent many years being composed in public, shoulders back, chin level, the whole body calibrated to read as having things under control. The burgundy dress had been bought 4 years ago, in a small shop in Florence, on a solo afternoon, while Dominic attended a meeting she had not been invited to join. A woman behind the counter had watched Elena hold the dress up and said, in careful, unhurried English, "This color is made for a woman who knows who she is." She had bought it immediately, and worn it twice since. She reached up and removed the earrings. Her grandmother's, small gold drops, very old, warm-colored and delicate. She kept them in a velvet box in the nightstand drawer, and wore them only for occasions that felt personally significant to her. She had put them on tonight because she wanted to wear something that was entirely and unconditionally hers. 3 months ago, she had walked into the hallway wearing these earrings, before a dinner Dominic was hosting, and he had glanced up from his phone and said, without cruelty but without any real attention either, "Are those the grandmother ones? A bit much for tonight, don't you think?" She had gone back and changed them. She had not touched them since. She placed them now on the nightstand, in the center, not the edge, not the drawer, the center, where they could not be moved or missed. She changed out of the dress with care, and hung it back in the closet. She put on something soft and uncomplicated. She poured a glass of water. She sat at the kitchen table, with the city going on outside the window, and the apartment very quiet around her, and she tried to name what she was feeling. It was not anger. She was clear-eyed about this, because anger would have been straightforward. It has direction and an outlet. What she felt instead was quieter than anger, and more structural. It was the feeling of a door that has been closing by fractions of an inch for a very long time, and has finally, without drama, reached the frame. 7 years ago, Elena Marine had walked into an autumn industry event at 31 and met Dominic Ashford across a room. She had heard the name before that night. In certain professional circles, people called him the Duke, not formally, and not as mockery, but as the kind of name that forms naturally around a person, because it is simply accurate. He moved through rooms as though he owned them. He made decisions with the composed precision of someone who had stopped second-guessing himself long ago. He chose things deliberately: his work, his city, his time, the people he spent it on, and he discarded things with the same precision when they no longer served. He had crossed the room that night and started a conversation that lasted 2 hours and covered 4 subjects and made her laugh 3 times without him trying to be funny. That last part, the not trying, was the most effective thing he could have done, whether or not he knew it. She had fallen in love with him completely. Not carefully, not with conditions or escape routes. The deep, settled, certain kind of love that doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives the way dawn does. So gradually, you don't observe the moment of change, and then you look, and the light is entirely different, and you understand, it has been changing for longer than you knew. He loved her too. Of this, she was never uncertain. The problem was never the love. The problem was where love was filed in his life, what it was required to wait behind, how many other things it was ranked below. Elena was important to him. She was real, she was chosen, but she was also always the last item on a full day. The plan that moved when other plans couldn't, because she had proven, over years, that she would understand. She had made it easy for him. She knew that now. She had bent herself to the shape of the space he gave her, and she had told herself it was patience, and sometimes it had been, but it had also been fear. Fear that needing things would make her harder to love, and so she had stopped needing things, publicly, clearly, in the ways that require a response. She had managed her own disappointment privately and efficiently, and in doing so, had helped build the very arrangement that was now, on the evening of their 7th anniversary, sitting between them like a question that had finally run out of time. Dominic came home at 11:40. She heard the key in the lock, heard him move through the apartment with the practiced quiet of a man who knows he has done something wrong and wants to minimize its footprint. He did not open the bedroom door. He did not sit on the edge of the bed in the dark and say her name. She found out in the morning that he had slept on the couch. He had thought it was a kindness. She lay in the dark for a long time. She did not cry. She thought about the shop in Florence and what the woman had said. She thought about the earrings on the nightstand. She thought about 23 occasions and what it meant that she had never confronted the number and what it meant that she was confronting it now. She thought about herself, not about what Dominic needed, not about what the relationship needed, what she needed, what she wanted, the shape of the life she had, and whether she had chosen that shape or simply accepted it, and when the accepting had happened, and what she was going to do now that she could see it. In the morning, Dominic made coffee and apologized. It was a genuine apology, or as genuine as an apology can be when it has traveled the same road so many times that the words have worn smooth. He explained about Arthur, said he had already called the restaurant to reschedule, reached across the table, and put his hand briefly over hers. Elena said, "Okay." Just that. No warmth, no reassuring smile, no, "It's fine, these things happen." Just the word. One syllable, complete, with nothing attached. He looked at her. She watched him try to read the situation. She watched him decide not to press it. He talked about Arthur for 35 minutes. She listened and said the right things, and when he left for work, she sat alone in the kitchen for a while. Then she got up, got ready, drove to the office, sat at her desk on the 14th floor, opened a blank document, and stared at the cursor. Then she typed, at the top of the empty page, "What is actually happening?" And for the first time in 7 years, she sat with the question fully honestly and began to answer it. She wrote for 45 minutes. She did not answer emails. She did not pick up the phone. She wrote about the earrings and the dress and 7 years of small adjustments. She wrote about specific moments she had managed privately and absorbed quietly and never allowed to surface into the open air of a real conversation. She wrote about things she had not done and places she had not gone and the very careful, very practiced way she had made herself easy to need nothing from. She read it back when she was done. She read it twice. Then she saved it in an unnamed folder, and she closed it, and she opened her work email. But the document was there, real. The first fully honest accounting she had produced of her own experience in several years, and the act of writing it and keeping it, not softening it, not deleting it, felt like something she could not take back. Something had changed. Something foundational. She could feel it the way you feel a shift in weather before the weather arrives, in the body, before the mind has fully caught up. She did not know yet what she would do. She knew, with the certainty of a woman who resolves things, that she would do something. She had been sitting in the parking garage for 14 minutes, with the engine off, and her phone still in her hand, when she realized she had not moved at all. This was 6 weeks before the anniversary. 6 weeks before the burgundy dress, and the earrings, and the document. It was the 3rd week of November, a Thursday evening, and Elena Marine had just had the best professional day of the last 3 years of her life, and she was sitting alone in a concrete parking structure in the dark, because she had called the person she wanted to tell, and had said, instead of what she meant to say, that everything was fine. The email had arrived at 4:47. She had been at her desk in the 10-minute gap between 2 back-to-back meetings, when the subject line appeared in her inbox, her name, and the words, Division Lead Appointment. She had read the first sentence, then the second, and then she had closed the email, clicked away from it, because her hands had started to tremble, and she did not want to be seen trembling at her desk in the open section of the 14th floor. She had opened it again 3 minutes later, and read it properly. It was real. 30 years of firm history. The first woman to hold the divisional lead position in all of those 30 years. 3 years of specific, patient, persistent work. The kind that doesn't make headlines, and doesn't get mentioned at dinner parties, and requires a great deal of simply continuing, when the path ahead is not clearly lit. The email from the managing director used the words, unanimous decision, and exceptional judgment, and said they were proud. She had sat at her desk, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not painfully, the way pressure releases, rather than the way something breaks. A shift in the region of the sternum, a sudden unfamiliar sense of expansion, as though she had been breathing in a smaller container than she knew, and someone had just removed the walls. She had picked up her phone and called Dominic. This was automatic. The reflex of 7 years. When something happened, you called Dominic. He was the person, the first person, the one whose voice you wanted in your ear, when the thing you had been working toward finally arrived. He picked up on the 4th ring. She heard it immediately. The background, not loud, but unmistakable. The warm, layered sound of an indoor gathering. Voices, glassware, the ambient pleasure of a room full of people who are enjoying each other. Hey, I'm at Marcus's thing. Everything okay? Marcus, a long-standing figure in Dominic's circle, the kind of man for whom Saturday evenings were events, and weeknight dinners were occasions. Elena had attended some of Marcus's gatherings. She had not been invited to this one. She opened her mouth. The sentence, I got the promotion, was fully formed, every word ready to leave. Yeah, everything's fine. Sorry to interrupt. She did not know why she said that. She did not know, standing in the lobby of her office building, with her badge still clipped to her lapel, and the promotion still open in her inbox, what had happened in the half-second between the sentence she meant to say and the sentence she said. Some part of her, the part that had spent years calibrating itself to available conditions, the part that had become expert at reading a room, any room, and understanding what it could hold, had heard the dinner party in the background, and the ease in his voice, and had made a calculation faster than thought. This is not the right moment. This is not a moment that can hold what I am trying to put into it. No, you're not interrupting. You sure everything's okay? Completely fine. Enjoy the evening. I'll see you at home. She had hung up. She had walked to her car. She had sat in the parking garage for 14 minutes and not moved. She was aware of several things in the quiet of the concrete structure, the cold coming through the car floor, the sound of her own breathing, the promotional email still open on her phone, still showing the managing director's words, and the feeling in her chest, the one that had started as expansion and had slowly, as the minutes passed, tightened into something she could not cleanly name, not grief, not anger, something older and more habitual. The specific weight of a woman who has learned, so thoroughly that the learning has become reflex, to put herself away. She drove home. Dominic arrived at 9:15 with the expanded, easy energy of a man who has had a good evening. He came in, shed his coat, poured water, and began to tell her about Marcus's dinner. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about a property conversation Marcus had been involved in on the eastern edge of the city. He talked about a man named Colin who had appeared unexpectedly and who had a complicated history with a deal from 3 years ago. He described the food, a specific dish, its components, who had ordered it. He talked about something that had been said near the end of the evening, and he walked through the setup and the delivery and laughed at the end of it. Elena sat on the couch with a cushion in her lap and listened. She said, and right, and that sounds like Marcus, in the right places. She watched his face as he talked, the pleasure in the retelling, the ease, the comfortable confidence of a man who has been well received all evening and is now bringing that warmth home. He was happy. She did not resent him for being happy. He did not know what had happened in her day. She had not told him. At the end, he looked at her and said, "You seem quiet tonight." "Long day," she said. He nodded and suggested she get some sleep. He kissed the top of her head and went to get ready for bed. She sat alone on the couch in the quiet room and thought about the managing director's email and about what she had said instead of saying it. She thought about the gap between those two things, the sentence she had meant to say and the sentence she had said, and what the automatic quality of the substitution revealed about what she had learned to expect. She didn't tell him that night, or the next day, or the day after. A week passed, then 2. The promotion became official internally. Colleagues stopped by her new office, and she accepted congratulations with warm professional ease, and thought each time about the parking garage. Oliver found out in the 3rd week when he walked past her new office door. "Wait," he said. "You got the lead position. Elena, why didn't I know about this?" She looked at him. She said, "I was waiting for the right time." He gave her a brief, puzzled look. He said, "Well, congratulations. Seriously," and left. She sat in her new office and thought about that phrase, waiting for the right time. She thought about what the right time would look like. She thought about whether she believed the right time had simply not arrived yet, or whether she had stopped expecting a right time and had been doing something else entirely, something closer to protecting herself from the disappointment of producing something important and not being met by someone who was fully there to receive it. She opened the document on her computer, the one with the question at the top that she had not yet answered. She added to it. She wrote about the parking garage, about the 4-ring delay and the party noise in the background and, "Is everything okay?" in the easy voice of a man having a good evening. About long day. About the gap. At the bottom of the new entry she wrote, "I stopped believing he was the person to tell. I don't know exactly when it happened, but the reflex broke somewhere, and I didn't notice the breaking until I was sitting in a parking garage, having said, 'Everything's fine,' to the person I had just needed most." She closed the document. She sat quietly for a while. Then her phone rang. Her sister Maya. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," she said. "Hey," Maya said. "I've been thinking about you. How are you?" Elena leaned back in her chair. She said, "I'm not sure." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me." Elena talked for a long time. Not the managed version, the real one. The parking garage, and the 40 minutes, and the right time that had stopped arriving. The anniversary she had not yet told Maya about. The earrings, the 23 occasions. 7 years of small calibrations, adding up to a shape she had never consciously designed. Maya listened the whole time. Occasionally, quietly. "I know." When Elena was done, the line was still for a moment. "I've been watching this for a long time," Maya said. "I didn't say anything because you weren't ready. I know you well enough to know that telling you something before you're ready to see it just makes you defend it." "I know," Elena said. "You're ready now," Maya said. "Yes." "Good. Then I want to ask you one thing, and I need you to hear the exact question and not a version that's easier to answer. Okay? Not what's fair. Not what he deserves or doesn't. Not what you owe the relationship. What do you want? Only you. What does your life look like when you imagine it correctly?" Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came. She sat with the question, sat with it fully, without reaching for an answer that was really a compromise, wearing the clothes of an answer. What did she want? Not what was reasonable, or possible, or appropriate given everything. What did she actually want? I don't know how to answer that, she said finally. I think I've forgotten. Maya's voice was very quiet. That's your answer, Elena. After the call, she sat in her office for a long time. The building had emptied around her. The floor was still. She sat in the quiet and thought about Maya's question, and thought about the parking garage, and thought about the sentence she had written. I stopped believing he was the person to tell. She thought, when does that happen? When does the person stop being the person? She did not know the exact moment. It had not been one thing. It had been gradual. So many small adjustments, so many quiet withdrawals, so many moments of turning inward with the things that mattered, because the conditions for turning outward never seemed quite right. Until the turning inward became habit, and the habit became the shape of things. She picked up her coat and her bag and turned off the light. She walked to the elevator. In the lobby, she paused with her hand on the glass door to the street and looked at her own reflection. Dark coat, neat hair, the composed expression she had worn for years. She thought about the woman in the Florence shop. She pushed through the door. She drove home. Dominic was there. He asked about her day. Good, she said. Productive. He nodded and told her about his. She listened. But something in her was different now. Something had been named that could not be unnamed. Something was in motion that was not going to stop. It was the third week of December, and Elena was sitting at the kitchen table at 11:45 at night, with the journal open in front of her, and both lists written and finished, and Dominic had gone to bed at 10. She had not planned the lists. They had not been a decision she had made and prepared for. She had sat at the table after dinner, with her journal, and the intention of writing something, anything, just getting thoughts outside of her head and into visible form. And the lists had come, one after the other, as though they had been waiting for the pen to arrive and ask the right question. The first list had started simply. She had written at the top, how many times, and then she had begun to count. She was precise about it. She went back through 7 years in her memory, not with grief or blame as fuel, but with the same careful attention she applied to the work she did every day, the professional habit of accounting, of wanting to know what was actually there before making a decision. Occasions he had canceled on her, or significantly changed, 61. She looked at that number for a while. Then, because she was genuinely committed to fairness, she wrote below it. Occasions she had canceled on him, 2. She made a second column. Times he had apologized for the cancellations, 58. Times the apology had been followed by a real and lasting change in behavior, approximately 4. Times he had asked her how she was feeling, specifically, with the intention of hearing the actual answer, and not the managed version, and had stayed with the conversation until the real answer arrived, 7. She was being generous with 7. She considered 5. She came back to 7 because she wanted to be fair. She sat with the page and looked at the columns. Then she turned to a new page. At the top of the new page she wrote, "What have I not done?" And the second list began. Lisbon, 2 years ago. The firm's European division had reached out to her directly, specifically to Elena, and asked whether she would consider a 2-year rotation. It had come with a meaningful salary increase and the kind of profile-building visibility that would have accelerated her career significantly. She had considered it for 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, she had told the European division's head that the timing wasn't right. The timing wasn't right because Dominic, when she had mentioned the offer, had said, not forcefully, not with ultimatum, but in the tone of a man who has already arrived at a conclusion and is simply relaying it. Lisbon, that's a big move. Are you sure about the timing? He hadn't forbidden anything. He had simply asked a question in a way that made his answer legible to anyone who knew him well enough to read the spaces between his words. She had known him well enough. She had heard what was not said. She had not gone. She wrote Lisbon on the second list. Her grandmother, the previous spring. Her grandmother had been in declining health in the late months of the year before, and Elena had arranged a week-long visit in April, had cleared her schedule, had told her grandmother she was coming. Then, 3 days before she was due to leave, Dominic had mentioned, in the casual, assuming way he mentioned things he expected to simply work themselves out, that he had committed to hosting a business dinner at their apartment on the Friday evening. Not a small dinner. People who were significant in the structure of his professional life. He had not specifically asked her to stay. He had just mentioned it, in a tone that made its weight clear. She had pushed the trip back by a week, then by 2 weeks. She had gone for 3 days in May, instead of a full week in April. Her grandmother had taken a turn in late May. She had died in June. Elena had not been there in the final weeks. She had told herself she would go the following month. She had not gone. She wrote grandmother on the list. Her graduate thesis. She had been enrolled part-time in a graduate program when she and Dominic first got together. She had been 3/4 through it. The program required more evening time than she had been giving it, and the evenings had slowly been claimed by other things, by being present, by being available, by being there in the apartment when he came home, a presence that she had not been asked to provide but had provided anyway, because it felt like what was required of her. She had deferred her enrollment once, then twice, then let it lapse entirely, telling herself that when things were less busy she would return. She had not returned. She wrote thesis. Her birthday. She had turned 37 the previous November. The week had been a complicated one for Dominic, something with Arthur's project, and she had said, when he mentioned it in the morning and suggested they celebrate that weekend, that she didn't need a fuss. She had believed herself when she said it. She had believed herself through the first weekend, when the situation was still developing and he was distracted, and through the second weekend, when they were both tired. And then, at some point in the middle of a quiet evening, 3 weeks later, she had been sitting alone with a glass of wine, and had felt something she hadn't been prepared for. A particular, specific grief, that was smaller than sadness, but more precise. The grief of having arranged your own expectations, to require nothing, so that nothing would disappoint. She wrote birthday. She set down the pen. She sat and looked at both lists. The first list said, "Here is the pattern of a person who takes more than he returns." The second list said, "Here is the shape of a life that has been managed to fit around another person's preference." The two lists were not separate things. They were the same thing, seen from two different angles. She thought about what this meant, not as a verdict, not as a case being built, simply as information. As the actual picture of actual things that had happened over actual years. She got up from the table. She went to the kitchen and put on the kettle. She stood at the window with a cup of tea and looked at the city below, quiet at this hour, the particular quiet of streets that have finished their evening and have not yet begun their morning. She thought about her grandmother's face, about what her grandmother had been like when she was alive and sharp and present, a woman who had taken up every inch of the space she had been given, who had not apologized for her opinions or her preferences or her laugh. Elena had loved her completely. She thought about what her grandmother would say if she could see the two lists on the kitchen table. She thought about the woman in the Florence shop. She went back to the kitchen table. She sat down. She opened the journal to a page near the back, away from the lists, and she held the pen and sat with the blank page for a while. Then she wrote one sentence. "I want my life back." She read it again. She did not cross it out. She did not add qualifications to either side of it, or soften it, or frame it within the larger context of what was fair to everyone involved. She let it be what it was. The plainest, most direct sentence she had written in 7 years. She closed the journal. She placed it on the table. She sat alone in the quiet kitchen, with the city below, and the heating humming, and both lists in the journal, and that one sentence. And she thought about what came next, not with urgency, not with the anxious, spiraling quality of someone trying to think their way out of something faster than they can think, with the careful, considered attention of someone who has finally looked at something true and is now deciding what to do with what they've seen. She thought about the practical things, because she was a practical person, and practical thoughts are a way of testing whether a decision is real. She thought about her finances, fully her own, always, because she had always made sure of that. She thought about what she needed, and what was actually available to her if she chose to use it. Then she stopped thinking practically, and just sat. She thought about who she had been at 31. The sharp, self-contained woman who had walked into an industry event alone because she preferred to move through rooms on her own terms, who had arrived at her career through persistence and intelligence and the particular focused energy of someone who knew what they were going toward. She had liked herself then, not with vanity, with the straightforward comfort of a person who knows who they are, and has made a reasonable peace with it. She thought about whether she still knew who she was. She got up, quietly, and rinsed her cup. She went to the bedroom. She moved softly so as not to disturb him. She lay down on her side and pulled the blanket up. She lay in the dark for a long time without sleeping, not with the old restlessness, not with the anxious cycling she had spent so many nights managing, with something different, something focused and still and new. She thought, I know what I need to do. I just need time to understand how. She had been sitting at the kitchen table for 25 minutes when she heard him stir in the bedroom. She did not get up. She did not go to the kitchen to pour coffee for him the way she usually would. She sat where she was, with her own cup in both hands, and waited. It was a Sunday morning in the first week of January. The apartment was gray with winter light. Elena had been awake since just past 6. She had made her coffee at 6:15 and taken her place at the table at 6:30, and she had been thinking, not with the circular, anxious quality of the past months, but with the measured, level clarity of someone who has decided something and is now simply preparing to act. This was the third time she had prepared for this conversation. The first 2 times, she had gotten as far as the kitchen and then let the moment pass, not from cowardice, but from the particular difficulty of choosing the right moment when no moment feels exactly right. You could always wait for better conditions. She had been waiting for better conditions for 7 years. She was done waiting. She heard the bedroom door, then the bathroom, and then his footsteps toward the kitchen. He came in. He saw her. Something in his expression registered her stillness. She watched it register. But he moved toward the coffee without comment, because that was how Dominic handled things he wasn't sure of. He observed and gathered before addressing. He poured his coffee. He sat across from her. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She held her cup. "I need to talk to you. About us. About how things have been." He set his cup down and gave her his full attention. She noticed this because Dominic's full attention was a tangible thing, a specific quality of presence that she had always been aware of when she had it. He had always been capable of it. He simply directed it elsewhere most of the time. "Okay," he said. "I'm listening." She began. She told him she had been feeling invisible, not unimportant. She was careful about the distinction, because she knew he would hear unimportant as a criticism of his feelings for her. And his feelings for her were not what she was questioning. Invisible in the sense of not being seen, not being asked about. Of the conversation in this apartment feeling, for a long time, like a door that only opened in one direction. She said it clearly and steadily, and without raising her voice. She said it looking at him. Then she watched what happened. He agreed with her, quickly, too quickly. The agreement arrived before she had finished speaking the full thought, and she recognized the speed of it immediately, not as understanding, but as appeasement. The swift, "You're right," that is meant to end the discomfort of the conversation, rather than begin the actual work of it. The agreement that is really a form of management. He said things had been hectic. He said he knew he had been distracted. He named Arthur's project, a few other things running simultaneously, the weight of the past season. He said all of this without defensiveness, without arguing. But she noticed that he was explaining the reasons for the behavior, rather than acknowledging the effect of the behavior on her. There is a difference between those two things. The first is about him. The second would be about her. He said, "I hear you." She thought, "Do you?" He said, "You know I love you. You know you matter to me." She thought, "I know, but that is not what this is about." He said, "Tell me what you need." She thought about that question, its architecture, the way it placed the solution back in her hands, made her responsible for designing the change, as well as requesting it. She had designed most things in this relationship for 7 years. She did not want to design this too. "I don't want to give you a list," she said. "I think you know what this is about. I need you to be curious about me, to ask how I am, and actually wait for the real answer. To notice when something has happened in my life, and ask about it, without me having to flag it for your attention." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. "I can do that," he said. "Things have been a lot lately, but I can absolutely do that." She looked at his hand on hers. She thought about the parking garage, about the 40 minutes on the couch while he described Marcus's dinner in full, about the earrings, about 23 occasions, and the quiet private ledger she had kept, because speaking plainly had felt too dangerous. about all the things she had absorbed and managed and smoothed over. She looked at his hand and thought, I believe you mean that right now. I believe you, in this moment, completely mean it. And I believe that in 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months, something will be hectic, and I will be the thing that waits. His phone lit up on the table. He did not reach for it. He was controlled enough, sufficiently aware of the moment, to not pick it up while she was looking at him. But his eyes moved to it, not for a full second, less than half a second, a fraction, the smallest possible pull of attention in the direction it had always gone. She felt it happen. She removed her hand from under his, gently, without pulling, just quietly, on her own terms. I'm glad you're listening, she said. I think I just need some time to sit with things. His face moved. She watched relief pass through it. The relief of a man who believes the hardest part of a conversation has ended, who feels the pressure release, who can now return to the regular morning. Take all the time you need, he said. Maybe we can have lunch today, later. She nodded. She put on her coat and shoes. She got in the car. She drove for an hour and 40 minutes, not going anywhere, just driving. Residential streets, quieter roads, an elevated stretch where she could see the river and the bridges and the city spread below. She drove without music. She thought about the phone lighting up, the half-second flicker. Not because it was a dramatic betrayal. She was too clear-eyed for that. What she was thinking about was not the half-second itself, but what the half-second revealed. That there was no moment, no conversation, no occasion, no attempt at genuine presence, from which the pull of the outside world would not succeed in drawing his eyes away. Not cruelly, just inevitably, as a matter of established habit and priority, that had never, in 7 years, been clearly examined or chosen against. She stopped at a bakery she had never been to before, in a part of the city she didn't usually come to. She went in and sat at a small table by the window, with a coffee she didn't really need, and a view of a street she didn't know. A woman at the table next to her was reading a book, a paperback with a broken spine. She was reading with the total, uncomplicated absorption of someone who is entirely elsewhere. As Elena watched, the woman reached something in the book that made her smile, a real smile, private and reflexive, the kind that is for yourself alone, not for the room. Elena looked at that smile for a moment. She thought, when did I last do that? Read something just for me, in a public place, alone, without thinking about where I needed to be, or what I needed to be ready for when I got there. She finished her coffee. She drove home. That evening she went to her home office, and closed the door, and sat at her desk. She took out her phone. She looked at a name she had saved 3 weeks ago, a therapist she had researched and read about carefully, and then saved without calling. She had been carrying the number for 21 days. She looked at the name. Then she called. It rang twice. A voice answered. Calm and professional, and entirely present. Elena said, I'd like to make an appointment. I've been trying to understand something for a long time, and I think I need some help. Of course, the therapist said. Can you tell me a little about what brings you here? Elena took a breath. I think, she said, that I need to figure out how to leave. The brush hit the canvas wrong, and Elena pulled it back, correcting the same line for the 4th time. And Rosa, sitting 2 feet to her right at the long studio table, said without looking up, You've done that 4 times. I know, Elena said. You're afraid of the line. I'm not afraid of a line. Rosa set down her own brush, and turned to look at Elena's canvas. Rosa was 67 years old, and had been a secondary school art teacher for 32 years, before she retired, and she brought to her Tuesday evening painting class the specific confidence of someone who has nothing left to prove in her field, and therefore nothing left to fear in it. Her own work on the table, a bowl of fruit that had been the class's assigned still life for 2 weeks, was enthusiastically imprecise. Her apple was dark red, and more conceptual than literal. Her bowl was aspirationally circular. She applied paint with the joy of someone who found the gap between intention and result amusing rather than distressing. You're afraid of what happens if you leave it wrong, Rosa said. Elena looked at the line. It was an honest assessment. What happens if you leave it wrong? Rosa asked. It's wrong, Elena said. Yes. And then you start the next part from the wrong line and see where that takes you. That's the actual painting, the finding out. Rosa turned back to her apple. You're painting for the result, You should paint for the finding out. Elena held her brush still for a moment. Then she lowered it to the canvas and made the next stroke without correcting the line first. It was March. She had been coming to the painting class above the hardware store since January, since the week after she had called the therapist from her home office with the door closed. She had enrolled without mentioning it to Dominic, not as a secret. She had simply enrolled, shown up, come home, and not raised it as a subject. Dominic had not asked where she went on Tuesday evenings. She had noticed this and filed it without comment. She had wanted to try painting since she was approximately 24. She had mentioned it, over the years, in the offhand way people mention the things they intend to do someday. Not urgently, just as a fact about themselves that is waiting for the right conditions. She had taken one class at 32 and found it genuinely satisfying, and then stopped after 3 sessions because the Tuesday evenings had gotten complicated. This time, she did not stop. Rosa had become the person she sat next to. Rosa, who arrived early and left late, and brought her own special brand of conviction to every session. Rosa, who had once said about a particularly strange painting that it was alive, which Elena had taken to mean it was lively in the way mistakes sometimes are, full of the evidence of a person actually trying, rather than the evidence of a person managing results. Elena's work had been careful in the first weeks, controlled. She labored over small sections and corrected constantly, and her results were neat, in the way that things are neat when you are more afraid of being wrong than you are interested in being right. After Rosa's comment, something shifted. Not immediately. Elena was not a person given to immediate transformation, but over the following weeks, the work loosened. She started making decisions and leaving them. She covered more of the canvas per session. She accepted imperfections as part of the picture, rather than problems to eliminate. The results were messier. They were also alive in a way the earlier work had not been. Rosa said, at the end of a Tuesday in March, "There you are." Elena looked at her. Rosa was looking at the canvas. "That's you in there," Rosa said. "That's what was missing." Dr. Coulter's office was on the 3rd floor of a building near the river. Elena went every other Wednesday afternoon. The sessions were the first 2 hours in her week that belonged entirely and exclusively to her, with no other purpose and no other person's needs inside them. In the second session, Dr. Coulter had asked about the relationship dynamic. Elena had described it, the cancellations, the conversations, the parking garage, the adjustments and management and private accommodation. She had been fair and measured in the telling, representing Dominic's perspective carefully. Dr. Coulter had said, "I notice that even when describing your own experience, you spend significant effort presenting his perspective fairly." Elena had considered this. She had said, "I don't want to be unfair to him." "What would it feel like," Dr. Coulter said, "to be the most important person in the room for this conversation?" Elena had not answered immediately. The question had stayed with her for the rest of the week. In the 4th session, they had talked about accommodation, why Elena did it, where it had come from, what it had cost. About a childhood in which being the low-maintenance one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need much, had been valued and quietly rewarded. About how a person can internalize that value so thoroughly that they build their adult life around it without ever consciously choosing to. About how you can end up in a relationship where the primary way you show love is by requiring nothing, and then one day, you understand that requiring nothing is not love. It is the absence of yourself. Elena had said, "I thought I was being strong." Dr. Coulter had said, "What else might it have been?" The answer came slowly, over weeks. Afraid. She had been afraid that needing things would make her harder to love. Afraid that taking up space would cost her the space she'd been given. Afraid that saying, "This is not enough," would be heard as, "You are not enough," and would end something she had invested too much to lose. She had made herself easy to love by making herself easy to ignore. She understood this now. It was not a comfortable understanding, but it was a true one, and true things, she had found, tend to be more useful than comfortable ones. In the first week of March, an email arrived from the organizing committee of her professional association's annual conference. She had submitted a paper 8 weeks earlier, something she had been developing for 3 years, had started and set aside and restarted, had finally finished in one focused evening and submitted without great expectation. They had selected it. She would present in October. She read the email twice, then she called Maya. Maya picked up immediately. "Talk to me." "The conference paper," Elena said. They took it. There was a pause. Then Maya made a sound that was not a word, but said everything a word would have said. "Elena," she said. "I know," Elena said. She held the phone and thought, "I'm proud of me too." She let herself feel it, fully, without the internal modesty that usually stepped in to minimize. She let herself feel proud. It was warmer and more specific than she had expected. She did not call Dominic. She noticed this without drama. She filed it as information. Dinner with Nora happened in the third week of March. Nora was one of Elena's oldest friends. They had met at university, had been close for years, had slowly drifted apart as Elena's availability had reduced. Cancelled plans, rescheduled calls, apologies followed by long gaps. Nora had never withdrawn her friendship. She had simply waited. They met at a restaurant Nora chose, somewhere new to both of them, full of warm light and good noise. They ordered too much food and didn't finish it. They talked for more than 3 hours. Nora said, near the end, leaning forward across the table, "You seem different." "I've been painting," Elena said. "That's not what I mean," Nora said. "You seem like yourself, the way you were years ago, before—" She stopped and chose her words. "You seem like yourself. I've missed you." Elena looked at Nora, at this woman who had known her for 15 years and had watched her disappear quietly and had waited for her to come back. "I've missed me too," Elena said. Nora reached across and put her hand briefly over Elena's. "I'm glad you're back," she said simply. At home, the texture of things was changing. Elena was not cold toward Dominic. She was not fighting, not distant, not pointedly different. She was just more herself, less adjusted to the shape of the room, less bent toward its center. She spent Tuesday evenings at the studio and Wednesday afternoons at Dr. Coulter's office, and she answered her own phone and bought her own groceries and had dinner with Nora and coffee with Rosa, and she did these things without organizing them around anyone's schedule but her own. One evening Dominic came home to find her laughing on the phone with Maya, a real laugh, one that filled the room. He stood in the hallway for a moment. When she hung up, he said, "You seem happy." "I am," she said simply. He smiled. He went to the kitchen. She watched him go and thought about that exchange. Happy. She had said yes without explanation, without offering him the comfort of being its cause. Just yes, and let it belong to her. He had not asked why. He had not asked what had changed or what was different about these weeks. He had accepted "I am" and moved on. She thought, that is information too. In the second week of April, a colleague mentioned the Lisbon position again. The European division had grown. The role was available again in a more senior form. Her colleague said she thought Elena would be extraordinary in it. Elena thanked her. She said she would think about it. That afternoon she requested the application information. That evening she stood at her open closet, hanging up her jacket, and her eyes went upward to the top shelf. A box she had not opened in over a year. A spare blanket, and behind both, pushed back so it was barely visible, the olive green canvas bag. She had bought it at a street market in Barcelona before she met Dominic. Old canvas, worn at the handles, the kind of bag that has been somewhere. She could not remember the last time she had taken it down. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she closed the closet. She got into bed. She turned off the light. But she lay in the dark and thought about the bag on the shelf, about Barcelona and who she had been when she bought it. 30 years old, purposeful, entirely her own. She thought about Lisbon, and the conference, and the painting drying in the studio, and Nora's words across the dinner table. She picked up her phone and sent Maya a message. "I think I know what I'm doing." Maya replied in less than a minute. "I know, I've been waiting." It was past midnight on a Friday, in the second week of May, when Elena called Maya and said the words out loud for the first time. She had been lying in bed in the dark for an hour. Dominic was asleep beside her. Easy, deep, regular sleep. The sleep of a man whose conscience was not disturbed by what Elena lay next to him thinking. She had been staring at the ceiling, with a clarity that felt almost physical, something bright and cool behind her eyes, and at 12:23 she picked up her phone and pressed Maya's name. Maya answered on the second ring. She had not been asleep. She said, "Hey," quietly, and in the quiet of it, Elena heard that Maya had been waiting for this call, had perhaps been waiting for it for a long time. "I'm going to leave," Elena said. Her voice was steady. Not performing steadiness. Actually steady. The way you are when you have been carrying a decision for weeks, and it has finally stopped being a decision, and started simply being the next true thing. "I've decided." On the other end of the line, Maya breathed in once, carefully. "Okay," she said. "I've known for a while. I just needed to say it out loud." "I know," Maya said. "I've known too." Elena shifted in the bed, moving slowly. She got up and went down the hallway to her home office and sat on the floor, with her back against the desk. Door closed, phone held to her ear. She had always thought more clearly on the floor. She couldn't explain it. The specific solidity of sitting on the floor while thinking serious things. "I'm not angry at him," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I'm not leaving because I hate him, or because I want to punish him. I'm leaving because I have been gone for a long time, and I need to make that real. I need to actually go." "I understand," Maya said. "I need you to not make this dramatic," Elena said. "I need you to just help me think." "I will," Maya said. "Tell me." They talked for 2 hours. The practical things first, because Elena was a practical woman, who needed to know the structure of the next steps before she could trust that she was ready to take them. Her name was not on the apartment lease. Her finances were entirely her own, always had been, because she had always been careful about that, had maintained her own account, and her own savings, with a consistency that she now understood had been, in some part of her she had never examined, an instinct towards self-preservation. Her car, her work, the conference in October. The Lisbon decision still open. She was not financially dependent. She had never allowed herself to be. Some part of her had known, in a place below conscious awareness, that maintaining her independence was more than good sense. It was a door left quietly open, just in case the day came when she needed to walk through it. Where she would go, Maya's apartment. The guest room had been empty since Maya's tenant moved out 3 months ago. Maya had mentioned this casually, twice, in passing. Elena had heard both mentions and understood them clearly. A door held open, without pressure, without agenda. When? Tomorrow morning. Not next week, not when the timing felt better. Tomorrow morning. Before the familiar machinery of accommodation could kick in and suggest that the moment wasn't right, that there was a better time just ahead, that a little more patience might change something. She had been a little more patient for 7 years. Tomorrow morning. Maya was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "I'll be here." Elena sat on the floor of her home office for a while after that. She thought about the shape of what she had just decided. Not what had to happen first, or what complications would follow, or what Dominic's face would do in the morning. Just the shape of it. The clean, certain, irreversible shape of having chosen. She went back to bed at 2:15. She did not sleep, but she lay quietly, not wakeful in the old way, not spinning. The decision was around her like something solid, and the solidity was its own form of rest. At 5:30 she was awake and up. She moved through the apartment in the gray pre-dawn, careful and unhurried. She made coffee in the kitchen and stood at the window with it and watched the sky. The dark became gray. The gray became lighter. The first specific shapes of the city resolved out of the general blur of before dawn. She watched a light come on in a building across the street. 3 floors up, a square of warm yellow in the gray. Someone else awake at this hour, in their own version of this. She drank her coffee slowly. Then she went to the bedroom and opened the closet. The olive green bag was on the top shelf. She had to stand on her toes to reach it. When she lifted it down and held it, the canvas was firm in her hands. Old but solid. Worn at the handles in a way that was familiar even after all this time. It had the smell of old canvas, and something she had decided, in recent weeks, to call possibility. She placed the bag on the floor in the center of the bedroom. She did not rush. There was no drama in the packing. She was simply a woman packing a bag in the early morning, while the man she was leaving slept in the room behind her. She was doing the next thing. She took one set of clothes from the closet. A sweater she liked, jeans that fit well, something soft to sleep in. She folded them and placed them in the bag. She took her journal from the nightstand drawer. She opened it and confirmed that the 2 lists were still inside the front cover. folded and tucked there months ago. The sentence at the back, "I want my life back," still there, in her own handwriting, in the place where she had put it. She placed the journal in the bag. From the small shelf above the nightstand, she took the photograph of her grandmother. Her grandmother 20 years ago, in a garden somewhere, young-looking and sharp-eyed and smiling. Elena placed the photograph carefully in the center of the journal. She took her passport from the drawer in her home office. She took the hand cream from the nightstand. The small tube of almond-scented hand cream that had lived on her side of the nightstand for 3 years, that she had been quietly moving back to her own side for 3 years because Dominic moved it to make room for his things, without noticing he was moving it. She looked at the hand cream. She placed it in the bag. She went to the closet and took down her painting supplies from the shelf where she had been keeping them. The case of paints, the brushes in their canvas roll, the 3/4 finished canvas from the previous week. She set these in a separate bag by the front door. She stood over the olive green bag and looked at what she had packed. She was not taking everything. This was intentional. She was not leaving in the way of someone stripping a place of their presence. She was leaving in the way of someone who was going somewhere, rather than away from somewhere. There is a difference. The bag was not the container of an escape. It was the container of a beginning. She looked at the nightstand. The earrings were there. Her grandmother's earrings. The small gold drops she had placed in the center of the nightstand on the anniversary night, and had not moved since. She picked them up. She held them in her palm. Then she placed them back on the nightstand, in the exact center, where they could not be missed, where anyone coming into the bedroom could not fail to see them. The earrings that had been a bit much. She left them where they were. She picked up her phone and opened the car service app. She entered Maya's address. She was looking at the request screen, thumb hovering over confirm, when she heard the footsteps in the hallway. The footsteps slowed outside the bedroom door. She had heard him wake, had heard the specific sounds of it, the change in his breathing, and the shift in the mattress, and then the quiet that meant he had sat up. She had stood still in the center of the bedroom, with her phone in her hand, and listened to him move toward the door, and she had not adjusted, had not hidden the bags or moved to a different part of the room or arranged her expression. She had stayed exactly where she was. The door opened. Dominic stood in the doorway. He was wearing the dark sweater he slept in during cold months. His eyes had the unfocused quality of a man who has just woken and has not yet assembled his full attention. He scanned the room with the instinctive, automatic attention of someone whose brain is still loading. The morning light, the window, the open closet, the 2 bags near the door. Then his eyes found the olive green bag on the floor in the center of the room. She watched the scan stop. He looked at the bag. He looked at Elena. He looked at the bag again. She had prepared for several versions of this moment. She had prepared for the composed, precise version of him, the Dominic who entered difficult situations with control and managed them from a position of authority. She had prepared for the version that argued, that questioned her reasoning, that asked her to reconsider with all the evidence laid out. She had prepared for the version that deflected into practicality. Let's talk about this before you do anything. She had not prepared for his face to do what it was doing. He was not composed. Whatever had assembled behind his eyes in the doorway was not control. It was something she had not seen in 7 years of knowing his face. Something that existed below the architecture of the man who moved through rooms as though he owned them. He looked, she thought, like someone who had walked into a room expecting the furniture to be in its usual place, and had found the room completely empty. She had not prepared for that. "Where are you going?" he said. The voice was careful, the boardroom voice. She recognized it even now. "Maya's," she said, "for now." He did not speak immediately. He stood in the doorway and looked at the bag, and at her, and at the 2 bags by the door, and at the closet standing open. He was doing what she had watched him do in difficult professional situations, taking in all the information before moving. Except this time, the gathering of information was not producing composure. This time, the more pieces he assembled, the less composed he looked. He stepped into the room. He did not move toward her. He walked around the bed, slowly, and stood in the center of the room, and he looked at the olive green bag on the floor, and he was very still. She had known this man for 7 years. She had seen him in every condition, at his most confident, his most fatigued, his most privately frustrated, the moments of genuine ease. She had seen a complete version of him, more complete than almost anyone else had, and she had never seen him look like this. He looked, she would tell Dr. Coulter afterward, as though the floor had unexpectedly shown him its edges. She watched him stand there in the early morning light, with the bag between them, and she thought, I knew this was real to him. I never doubted that. I just ran out of ways to keep choosing a love that did not know how to choose me back. He tried to speak. She saw the intake of breath, the slight lean forward, the gathering of whatever he was trying to form. He tried twice. Nothing came out. Then, slowly, in the way that someone sits down when their legs have made the decision rather than their mind, he sat down on the floor. Not on the bed, 4 steps behind him, not on the chair by the window. The floor. He sat down on the floor of the bedroom with his back straight and his hands on his knees, and he looked at the olive green bag, and he did not say anything. Elena stood over the bag with her phone in her hand and looked at him. She felt 2 things at the same time, and she was clear-eyed enough to feel both of them without letting one cancel the other out. She felt something she recognized as compassion, not the reflex kind, not the kind that made her want to kneel beside him and take his face in her hands and say, "It's all right, I'm here." A cleaner kind, the kind that acknowledges someone's pain without taking responsibility for it. The kind that says, "I see you. I am sorry you are feeling this, and this is still happening." And she was honest enough to feel it, and to name it to herself. The total absence of surprise. She was not surprised. That was the thing. Standing in the bedroom with the olive green bag between them and Dominic Ashford sitting on the floor, she was not surprised. Some part of her had always known this was there, under the composure and the boardroom and the careful management of himself. She had always known, in the place below thought, that the man she loved was capable of being reached. She had just never been important enough to the way things were arranged to reach it. She had never been the one he had been willing to collapse in front of before she was already leaving. He looked up at her from the floor, and he said the first true thing he had said to her in a very long time. Not managed, not the careful, calibrated response she had come to expect. Something from below management, from the place that comes out when there is nothing left to perform for. "I didn't know you were this gone." The room was completely still. She held her phone. She looked at him sitting on the floor. She thought about 7 years, about the parking garage and the 40 minutes and the earrings on the nightstand and the second list in the journal, about the olive green bag she had bought alone in a market before this life had started, and what she had put into it this morning, and what she had left behind. She said, steadily, and without apology, "I've been trying to tell you." He pressed his hands flat on his knees and looked at the floor between them. "I know," he said. "I didn't hear it." Something moved through his expression. She watched him receive his own admission. "I didn't hear it," and feel the weight of it. "The November evening," he said. "The call. You were in the building." She looked at him. "I saw the date on the announcement later," he said quietly. "When Oliver mentioned your office had changed. I did the math." She said nothing. "You called me, and I was at Marcus's dinner," he said. "Yes. And you said everything was fine." "Yes." He was quiet. "You got the promotion that day." "Yes." He put his hands over his face for a moment. Then he lowered them. He looked at her from the floor, with an expression she did not have a complete word for. Not guilt, not regret. Something larger than either of those. Something that belonged to a person who has finally understood the distance between when they should have understood something, and now. "I didn't know," he said. "You couldn't have," she said. "I didn't tell you, but the reason I didn't tell you is the thing I need you to understand." He nodded. He said, "Tell me." She looked at him on the floor. Then she said, "Can you get up first? I need to say this properly." He put his hands on the floor and stood. He stood across the room from her. Not close, not far. Just there. Present in the room, in a way he had not been in a long time. She said, "Here is what I need you to hear." She told him about the parking garage first. She stood in the center of the bedroom, coat on, bags at the door behind her, and she told him about the Thursday in November, the email, the managing director's words, the 4-ring delay, the background noise of Marcus's dinner, the party sounds in the gaps of his voice. About the sentence she had meant to say, and the sentence she had said instead. About 14 minutes with the engine off in the concrete dark. "I sat there," she said, "and I thought, I need to tell him. I need to say it. And what came out instead was, "Everything's fine," and I hung up. And I understand now why it happened. I understand that I had learned, over a long time, that my news would be received the way it deserved to be received, only if you were completely present for it, and that night you were not. And so I put the news away, and I kept putting it away, and I never told you. He stood across the room and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not correct. She told him about the 40 minutes on the couch, about sitting there while he described Marcus's dinner in full detail, about and right, and "That sounds like Marcus," said with none of herself behind them. About, "You seem quiet tonight." About, "Long day." "I was not having a long day," she said. "I was having the most significant professional moment of the past 3 years of my life." And I said, "Long day," because I had already given up on telling you. Because long day was the version of the answer that required nothing from you, and cost nothing, and smoothed over the distance between where we actually were and where I kept trying to believe we could be. He said nothing. She told him about the lists. Not as a weapon, she was careful about that. She told him about sitting at the kitchen table near midnight and finding herself counting, and what she had found when she counted, the 61 occasions, the 7 times he had asked how she was and waited for the real answer. She told him about the second list. She told him about the things she had not done. "Lisbon," she said. 2 years ago, the European division, you know what you said. "I said it was a big move," he said quietly. "I asked if you were sure about the timing." "Yes. And I heard everything you meant by asking, and I didn't go." He looked at the floor briefly, then back up at her. She told him about her grandmother. She told him about the visit she had been planning in April, and the dinner he had committed to hosting, and the weight of the mention, and the way she had pushed the visit back, then pushed it further, then gone, for 3 days, instead of a week. "She died in June," Elena said. He was very still. "I didn't know about the visit," he said. "I didn't know you pushed it back." "I know," she said. "I managed it. I made the decision quietly, and absorbed the consequence quietly, and I never told you that I had made it, because telling you would have required you to engage with the choice in a real way, and I didn't trust, by that point, that the choice would matter enough to you to be worth the engagement." He turned away from her briefly. He went to the window. He stood with his back to her for a moment. She waited. He turned back. "I would have told you to go," he said. "I know," she said. "I believe that. But by then, believing you would say the right thing when I raised it was not the same as believing you would have noticed without being asked. And I was tired of having to ask." She told him about the thesis, about the birthday, about the Lisbon position and what it had cost her to let it pass, and what it had cost her to stay, and whether staying had been the right choice or the only choice she felt she had in the circumstances she had made for herself. Then she said the thing she had been sitting with the longest. "Love is the thing you feel," she said. "What I was asking for is the thing you do, and what you have done, for a long time, consistently, across many things, is put everything else first. Not because you don't love me, I know you love me, but because I was the stable arrangement. The one that could wait, because I had always waited. You filed me as the thing that was safe to defer, because I had never shown you that I would eventually stop waiting." He stood at the window with his hands at his sides and said nothing. "And I made it easy for you," she said. "I want to be honest about this, because this is not only about what you did. I bent myself into the shape of the space you gave me, and I told myself it was love, and sometimes it was, but it was also fear. I was afraid that needing things would make me harder to love, so I stopped needing things visibly. And in making myself easy to love, I made myself easy to ignore." She paused. "We built this together," she said. "You did not do this to me. I participated. I chose things that made this arrangement possible, and I am responsible for those choices. But I am the one who has finally understood what we built and what it has cost, and I am the one who has to do something about it," he said, carefully and quietly. "Is there nothing I have been trying to tell you?" she said. "Not like this. Not in a speech, in small ways, over a long time. The quiet moments when I said, 'I feel invisible,' and you agreed too quickly and moved on. The Sunday conversation. The things I said and the things I didn't say, and the things I hoped you would ask about, and you didn't ask. I have been trying, in the ways available to me, for a long time. He pressed his hands together. I didn't hear it, he said. No, she said, you didn't. I should have. Yes. The room was quiet. She stood with it. She let the silence be what it was. Not uncomfortable. Not something that needed to be filled. Just the space that honest things require. Then she said, you are not a bad man. I need you to understand that I am not saying that to be kind, or to give you something easier to carry. I believe it. You are not a bad man. You are a person who has treated love as something that can always wait until more urgent things are handled, and I am a person who let that be true for much longer than was good for either of us. This is not a trial. You are not on trial. It is just what is true. He looked at her. His eyes were very direct. Will you call me, he said. Eventually, when you've had some time. She held his gaze. I don't know, she said honestly. I need to be outside of this first, before I can know what comes after it. He nodded. She picked up the olive green bag. She picked up the bag with her painting supplies. She moved toward the door. At the door she stopped. She turned back. He was standing in the center of the bedroom in the morning light, hands at his sides, and the earrings were on the nightstand behind him, small and gold and entirely visible. The earrings, she said, the grandmother ones. They were never too much. What you said was wrong. He turned and looked at the nightstand. I know, he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Take care of yourself, she said. She meant it. Then she turned and walked to the front door, and opened it, and went. The elevator doors closed. She stood in the small mirrored box with the olive green bag in one hand, and the painting bag in the other, and her coat on, and the elevator descended, and she breathed. She looked at herself in the elevator mirror. She was present. She was here. She was fine. Not the managed version of fine she had been performing for years. Not the long day version. Not the everything's okay version. Actually fine. The kind of fine that exists on the other side of a hard thing, when the hard part is behind you, and what remains is only the next things, the real things, the things you choose. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She crossed the marble floor. The concierge, Albert, who had been on Saturday mornings in this building for as long as she had lived there, looked up from his desk and said, Good morning, Miss Marine. She said, Good morning, Albert. She did not stop. She pressed through the glass door and stepped out onto the street. It was the second Saturday in May. The morning was cool and bright, with the particular clarity of spring mornings that have not yet committed to warmth. The street was quiet at this hour. A person walking a dog in the middle distance, a delivery truck at the far corner, the city still warming up to itself. She stood on the pavement for a moment and breathed the outside air. She did not look back at the building. This was not a performed decision. She was not refusing to look back as a statement. She had simply said what she needed to say, and left what she needed to leave, and looking back at the building from the outside would not add anything to what she already understood. She had lived in that building for 5 years. She had loved a person there, and made a life there, and made decisions there that had slowly, across years, led her to this pavement on this morning. She understood all of it. She did not need to look at it again. Her car was 3 minutes away. She stood with her bags and waited. The dog walker passed. The delivery truck moved. The morning went on being itself. The car arrived. She got in. She settled the olive green bag on the seat next to her and gave the driver Maya's address. He checked the navigation and pulled into the street. She watched the city through the window. She did not cry. She was aware of this in the way she had been tracking her own interior weather for months. Carefully, honestly, without interpretation. There was a particular heaviness in her chest. Not sharp, more like the weight of a thing completed. The weight of an ending. Not the sharp grief of loss. She had felt that kind of grief before, when her grandmother died, when friendships faded. And this was different. This was heavier and more settled. The gravity of something that has been in motion for a long time, finally coming to rest. She thought about things in the car. She thought about a Tuesday evening in February, arriving at the painting studio above the hardware store. Rosa already at the long table with her aspirationally circular bowl, the room smelling of turpentine and old wood, and the specific feeling of sitting down in that room, and knowing, without quite being able to explain it, that it was a room where she was allowed to take up space. She thought about the evening she had sent the conference paper submission, 45 focused minutes, the send button pressed, the particular exhaustion of finishing something that had been unfinished for too long. She thought about Nora across a dinner table saying, "You seem like yourself. I've missed you." She thought about the olive green bag resting on the car seat next to her, light and solid and entirely hers. She thought about one specific evening from 3 years ago. She and Dominic had driven up into the hills on a Saturday night, and they had parked at the top and sat on the hood of the car, and the city had spread below them in every direction, all those lights, all that density, all that life going on at once. And Dominic had looked at it for a long time and then said, very quietly, as though saying something he had not said aloud before, "I think this might be the best I've ever felt." She had believed him. She had felt it too. The warmth of being beside someone who is genuinely happy. The specific pleasure of a moment that is working. She held that memory now in the back seat of the car, moving through the morning city. She held it with both hands, looked at it clearly, let it be real. She was not revising those years. She was not shrinking the good things to make them easier to leave behind. The good things had been real. They deserved to be real. She placed the memory carefully, and she let it go. Maya's building. She paid the driver and got out. She stood on the pavement, looking up at the 4th floor, the end window, the light on. She pressed the buzzer. Maya's voice came through the intercom immediately, as though she had been standing next to it. "Come up." The elevator in Maya's building was slow and old, and had a light that flickered. Elena stood in it with her bags, and looked at the flickering light, and thought about what she had just done, and for the first time since that morning, something shifted in her chest. Not grief. Something closer to release. The specific physical sensation of a breath that has been held for a very long time, finally being let all the way out. Maya opened the apartment door before Elena reached it. She was in her pajamas, dark hair sleep-tousled, holding a mug. She looked at Elena, then the bags, then Elena again. She said nothing. She just held out one arm. Elena stepped into it. She did not cry loudly. She did not collapse. She stood in her sister's hallway, with the bags at her feet, and her chin against Maya's shoulder, and breathed in twice, sharp, catching, and then she was still. Maya held her arm there, did not offer words of reassurance, did not say it was going to be okay, or that she had done the right thing, just kept her arm there, and let Elena be inside it. After a moment, Elena stepped back. She straightened her coat. She looked at Maya. "I'm okay," she said. "I know you are," Maya said. "Come in, I made soup." Elena laughed. It surprised her. The laugh. Full and real. Coming from somewhere that had not been accessed in a while. Maya said, "What?" And Elena said, "Just soup." And Maya said, "Soup matters." And Elena said, "It really does." And they went into the kitchen. That night Elena slept in Maya's guest room. The room had one window that looked out over a back courtyard. And at this hour the courtyard was quiet, and the street beyond it was a distant and gentle murmur, the city at a remove. She lay in the guest bed and let the quiet settle around her. She thought about the day. She went through it carefully, not to re-experience the difficult parts, but to register that it had happened, that she had done what she had decided to do, that the doing was complete and could not be undone, and that this was exactly what she had chosen. She thought about the olive green bag leaning against the wall by the small chair in the corner, the bag from the Barcelona market, the bag that had sat on the top shelf for years, waiting. She thought, "I am here. Not yet. I am free. Not yet. I am happy." Those things would come, or they wouldn't, or they would come differently than expected, and she would find out. But right now, in this room, in this bed, in Maya's guest room on a Saturday night in May, she was here, in a place she had chosen, in a version of things that was entirely hers. Something clean in that, something she had not expected. She closed her eyes. She slept. In the morning she woke before Maya. The apartment was gray and quiet with early light. She went to the kitchen in her socks and found the kettle and the tea on the shelf above it, and a mug, and she made tea and stood at the window. In the courtyard below, a bird landed on the edge of a stone planter. It sat there for a moment, perfectly still. Then it flew. She thought, what is next? Not urgently. Not with the obligatory anxiety of a person who must immediately solve the open questions of their life. Just the question, held lightly, and with something she recognized, with a small amount of surprise, as curiosity. She was curious about what came next. She had not felt curious about her own future in a long time. She took out her journal from the olive green bag. She brought it to the window. She opened it to a fresh page, far from the lists, far from the "I want my life back" sentence at the back. She held the pen. Then she wrote 2 words at the top of the clean white page. Day 1. She held the pen still after she wrote it. She read it twice. Then she closed the journal and put it on the counter, and picked up her tea and turned back to the window. The bird had come back to the planter. She watched it. She breathed. Day 1. It was a Friday evening in November, exactly 1 year, almost to the week, since the evening in the parking garage, when Elena stood at the window of her new apartment and cried for the first time. Not from sadness. She was precise about this, even in the privacy of her own living room, because precision was how she understood herself, how she had always made sense of her own interior weather. She was not crying from sadness. She was crying from the thing that has no clean name, the thing that happens when you have been carrying something for a very long time, and you set it down and look at it from a distance, and the distance makes the weight visible, and the visibility is its own emotion entirely. She had been making dinner. A record was playing on the small player she had bought when she moved into this apartment, something she had always wanted, a record player, something she had never gotten around to purchasing, because Dominic preferred playlists, and that preference had become, like many preferences in that life, simply the way things were done. She had been cooking and humming along to the record without quite realizing she was humming, and she had looked up from the cutting board and through the archway into the living room at the painting above the fireplace. She had finished it in late September. It had taken 6 weeks. Rosa had called it the best thing Elena had produced, which said more about Rosa's encouragement than about the painting's objective quality. But there was something in it that Elena recognized as hers, not just in the technical sense, but in the deeper one, the sense of a person who has found the thing they were trying to say, and managed to say it without explaining. A jar of water with dried flowers in it, the light coming through from the left, the shadows more interesting than the jar itself. She had looked at her own painting in her own apartment with the record playing, and something had cracked open in her chest. The good kind. The kind that happens when something under pressure is finally released. She had stood there for a while. Then she had wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and gone back to the cooking, and the record played on, and the apartment went about being itself. The apartment was hers. That was the fact she returned to most often. On ordinary evenings, waking in the night, standing in the kitchen in the morning light, the apartment was hers. 4th floor, 2 rooms. Morning light through the kitchen window. High ceilings in the living room. And the small decorative fireplace she had filled with candles, because it made the room feel like itself. She had spent 4 days arranging it, and the only criterion she had used, the only filter she had applied to every choice, was, does this feel right to me? Not to anyone else. To her. 6 months. 6 months since the olive green bag, and the elevator, and the lobby, and the street, and Maya's soup. 6 months, in which a great deal had happened. She had stayed at Maya's for 3 weeks. Maya had made room without making an occasion of it. No announcements, no ceremonies. She had simply had a guest room and a sister who needed it, and she had made the guest room available, and the kitchen comfortable, and her company easy, and had let Elena be there without needing it to mean anything beyond what it was. The new apartment had come through a colleague of Nora's, a vacancy in a building on a street Elena had always liked. She had signed the lease 3 weeks after leaving, and moved in on a Saturday morning with Maya and Nora and Oliver, who had shown up carrying pastries and saying, I brought these because I genuinely didn't know what else to bring, which turned out to be the exact right thing. Dr. Coulter. The sessions had continued through the summer and into the autumn, and they were different now. Not the urgency of, I need to figure out how to leave, but the slower, richer work of understanding who you are, when the structure that was deforming you is removed. Elena found this work unexpectedly interesting. She found herself curious about herself in a way she had not been for a long time. Not self-absorbed, curious. The way you are curious about a room you have been moving through in the dark, and are finally seeing in full light. The conference had been in October. She had flown to the city where it was held, had checked into her hotel room, had spent an evening going over her notes in a way that was more ritual than preparation, because she already knew what she was going to say, and had known it for a long time. She had stood at the podium in a room of people she respected, and had spoken for 35 minutes, clearly and without apology, about something she had been thinking carefully about for 3 years. She had been good. She knew it without arrogance. With the same clean, honest recognition, she was learning to apply to all the true things about herself, not minimizing, not inflating, just accurate. Afterward, at the conference dinner, people she had admired from a distance sought her out. A woman from the far end of her field, someone Elena had read and thought carefully about, and not expected to actually meet, had said, "I've been waiting to hear you speak for 2 years." Elena had held that sentence for the rest of the evening. She had let it be what it was. She had called Maya from her hotel room that night. "I think I remember who I am," she had said. Maya had been quiet for a moment. Then, "I know who you are. I never forgot." Leo had been introduced by Nora at a dinner party in the last week of September. Not set up in the formal sense. Nora was too careful for that, knew Elena too well for it. She had simply invited Elena to a small dinner, 8 people, at her apartment, and Leo had been there. He was a landscape architect, quiet in the way of people who are comfortable with silence. Slightly tall, with the kind of face that looked more interesting the longer you looked at it. He had been at the other end of the table, and they had talked across 4 people about something Elena could not now quite remember, and then after dinner, they had found themselves standing at Nora's sitting room window, looking out at the garden in the dark. "Did she do all of that herself?" Elena had asked. "She has extremely specific opinions about the hydrangeas," Leo had said. "I know this because she told me about them for 40 minutes. Elena had laughed. He had turned and looked at her, not the way men look at women at dinner parties when they are performing attention. Just turned and looked, with the simple directness of someone who is genuinely interested in the face they are looking at. "What do you do?" he had asked. She had told him. The real version, the full version, not the deflecting modest version, not the one that says, "Oh, just project management really." Her work, the divisional lead position, the paper, the conference, the Lisbon decision she was still sitting with. He had listened with both hands wrapped around his glass and not checked his phone once. He had asked 2 follow-up questions, real questions, the kind that means someone has actually been paying attention to the answer they just received. At one point, she had trailed off mid-sentence, self-conscious about the length of her own talking, and he had said simply, "Keep going," because the pause had been hers, and he could tell it was not finished. She noticed that. She filed it. They had coffee the following week. Dinner the week after. She had told him about the painting class over dinner, about Rosa and the corrected lines and, "You're painting for the finding out." He had leaned forward and said, "What do you paint?" with the specific interest of someone who wants to know. She had described the most recent painting, the jar, the dried flowers, the interesting shadows. "A jar," he said. "A jar," she confirmed. And it went wrong, in an interesting way. The water went wrong. I found it informative. He had smiled. A real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes and stays there a moment longer than the polite version. "I'd like to see an interestingly wrong painting of a jar," he said. She had decided, that evening, that she liked him. She was not in a hurry. She was not filling a gap. She was not running toward the next thing to avoid sitting with the space she had created. She was choosing, slowly and deliberately, with the full attention of a woman who has learned exactly what it costs to choose without care. But she liked Leo, and liking someone, she had decided, was a thing worth continuing to find out about. The 2 calls from Dominic had both come from him. The first, 4 months after she left, came through her work number. She had answered. He said, "I wanted you to know I've started seeing a therapist. I'm trying to understand some things." She had said, "I'm glad." A pause. "How are you?" he said. "Good," she said. She meant it. Another pause. "Okay," he said. "That's what I wanted to know." He hung up. The second call came 6 weeks later, on a weekday afternoon, same number. "I'm learning something," he said, without preamble. "About the way I treat the people I love, how I file them." He paused. My therapist used that word, actually. Filed. She said I file the people who care about me most in the category of things that can wait. Elena was quiet. I wanted you to know that I understand it now, he said. Not to get something. Not because I want something from you. I just wanted to say it. Thank you, she said. She meant that too. A long pause between them. Not awkward, just honest. The pause of two people who know each other well and do not need to fill silence with sound. Are you okay? He said finally. She thought about the apartment and the painting above the fireplace and the record player and the conference paper and Leo saying, "Keep going," and Rosa and the olive green bag on the shelf of her new closet. She thought about the morning at Maya's with the bird in the courtyard, about day one in her journal and what day it was now. I really am, she said, for the first time in a long time. Another pause. Good, he said. That's what I wanted. She believed him. That was the simple, unguarded thing she realized as she sat with the phone after he hung up. She believed him completely. He had wanted her to be okay. He had always wanted her to be okay. He had simply, for a long time, not understood that wanting something for a person and doing the things that would actually help them have it are two entirely different kinds of love. She sat quietly for a few minutes after the call. Then she called Leo and asked if he wanted to go to the market on Saturday. He said yes before she finished the sentence. The olive green bag lived on the top shelf of her new closet. She had placed it there on the day she moved in, and she had taken it down twice since, once for a weekend in Edinburgh in October, alone, walking in the cold and eating dinner by herself in a small restaurant and sleeping well and waking to a different city's light. Once for a weekend in Paris with Maya in November, on a train, through the northern countryside, with the late afternoon light falling across the landscape in long horizontal bars. The bag had been places. It had been in the overhead compartment of 2 flights, and on the seat beside her, on the train to Paris, and on the floor of a hotel room in Edinburgh, in the rain. It had gone more places in 2 months than it had gone in 5 years. She had laughed at that thought, alone on the train to Paris, and the man across the aisle had looked at her with mild curiosity. She had shrugged. She was not obligated to explain. On the Friday evening in November, after she had stood at the window and cried in front of her own painting, and gone back to the cooking, and eaten dinner alone, with a book open beside her plate, she sat for a while in the quiet of the apartment with her tea. She had been reading something she had been meaning to read for 2 years, and had now read in 3 weeks, because the evenings were hers, and the pace of them was entirely hers, and there was no external weather to calibrate herself around. She finished her tea. She cleaned up the kitchen. She stood at the living room window with the last of the evening around her, the city below doing what cities do on Friday nights. Lit and moving and full of itself, all those separate lives going on at once. She thought about who she had been when this all started. Standing at a different window, in a different apartment, in a burgundy dress she had bought in Florence, waiting for a message she had already known was coming. Feeling the door she had been closing by fractions of an inch, finally reach the frame. That woman was not so different from the woman standing here now. She had not been broken by what happened. She had not been rescued by what followed. She had not been made new by love, or by achievement, or by any single, clean transformation. She had simply, slowly, with great difficulty and great clarity, and the considerable help of a therapist, and a sister, and a retired art teacher, who could not paint a bowl, found her way back to something she recognized as herself. And back was not quite the right word. It was not the self she had been at 31, not the person from before this relationship. It was something that contained all of that and more. The 7 years, and the parking garage, and the earrings, and the lists, and the 2 lists, and the olive green bag, and the painting, and the conference, and the knowledge, finally settled and permanent, of what she needed, and what she would no longer arrange her life around not having. She was all of those things put together. She was going to keep being put together, slowly, and on her own terms, 1 year and 1 day at a time. She went to the kitchen and rinsed her glass. She stood at the window for 1 more moment. She was humming something. She realized it only when she stopped and heard the silence, and recognized that the humming had been happening without her noticing. The record from earlier, a melody she didn't know the name of, just the shape of it in her throat. Humming while she washed up, without thinking about it, without deciding to. She smiled at that, at the unconscious humming, at the fact of a life that had become inhabited enough that music came out of it without prompting. She went to the bedroom. She opened the closet to hang up her cardigan. At the top of the shelf, the olive green bag, old canvas and worn handles, and the smell she had decided months ago to call possibility. She looked at it for a moment. Just a moment. The bag that had waited on a shelf for 5 years. The bag she had packed on a Saturday morning in May, with a journal and a photograph, and a tube of almond hand cream, and her grandmother's photograph, and her passport, and one set of clean clothes. The bag that had been in the elevator with her when the doors closed. The bag she had carried to Maya's building and set on the floor of the guest room that first night. She closed the closet. She got into bed. She turned off the light. She lay in the dark in the apartment that was hers, on a Friday night in November, the city quiet beyond the window, and she let her mind go where it wanted to go, which was nowhere in particular, and everywhere at once. The market tomorrow, and Leo saying yes before she finished the sentence, and Rosa and her bruised moon apples, and Dr. Coulter's office by the river, and the conference podium, and the woman who had been waiting to hear her speak, and Maya's voice at midnight saying, "I know, I've been waiting," and the bird in the courtyard on a Sunday morning in May, and 2 words written at the top of a blank page. Day 1. And all the days that had been entirely her own since then. She closed her eyes. She slept.